Members, I regret that circumstances have muted our celebration today. Our floors should be packed with former colleagues and old friends, and the galleries should be filled to the rafters with your families and supporters. Each one of us is here because of the hard work of so many people. Members, I'd ask that you stand, that we give a big round of applause for all of those people who came to Tallahassee today, to all of those who are watching you on the Florida channel, and for all of those who are here with us in spirit. To our guests from other branches, Justice Polston, thank you for being here to represent the Florida Supreme Court and for administering the oath of office to our members. To our governor, our lieutenant governor, our attorney general, our chief financial officer, and our agriculture commissioner, thank you for joining us here today to celebrate the convening of the 90th term of the Florida House of Representatives. Governor DeSantis, please know that the members of this House stand ready to work with you to keep Florida on a path to prosperity. I know that we were all looking forward to working with our partners in the Florida Senate, but I feel especially privileged to occupy this office while Wilton Simpson presides over the Senate. President Simpson, you're a man of character, compassion, and courage. I look forward to standing shoulder to shoulder with you, Wilton, in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you. Representative DuBose, you've always conducted yourself in this process with integrity, with passion, and with candor. Your respect and care for this institution is surpassed only by the respect and care that you have for the members you will now lead. Congratulations. The saying goes, a captain is only as good as his crew. And in the House's leadership team, I have the very best. Representatives Avila, Grant, Trumbull, Renner, Burton, Ingolia, Latvala, Masulo, Perez, Leak, Grawl, and Payne. Thank you for everything you do to make this state and this House better. To my fellow classmates elected with me in 2014, it has been a long, sometimes rough, sometimes thrilling, but always interesting journey. I'm glad we are all here together for this, our last chapter in the Florida House. To the freshman members who are at the start of your first chapter, welcome. This House is many things, but mostly it is a place that rewards what you put into it. Embrace every opportunity. Learn as much as you can, and spend time with people who see the world differently than you do. For the sophomores and juniors, I'm going to ask you to take off your legislative autopilots, discard your old assumptions, and look at this process with new eyes. Over the last 2 weeks, we've rolled out a series of reforms to make sure that the House continues to evolve and adapt. Ultimately, though, your experience will be governed by your choices. And while I certainly can't stop anyone from having a tantrum on Twitter, please know that there will be no place for that kind of Washington, D.C. style conduct inside this chamber or in this House. We can disagree and still treat one another with goodwill, patience, and mutual respect. The ties that bind us are always greater than the things that divide us. I learned that lesson from my family. Growing up, we had no shortage of lively debates around the dinner table. And I'm reminded of that lesson every time my wife, Shannon, tells me that I'm wrong about something. Those of you who spend time with us know that happens pretty often, and she's almost always right. I've been so incredibly blessed by God to have a family that has surrounded me with their love and support. but has also been so generous in sharing their triumphs and their tragedies. We are, after all, not simply the sum of our own experiences, but the product of our own family's journey. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about families. I want to talk to you about fathers and sons, about mothers and daughters, about the families we're born into, the families we find, and the families we make. The concept of family predates law or civilization or culture. It represents the fundamental human connection that defines how we see the world and our place in it. As anyone who spent more than 15 minutes with me or listened to some of the talks today, I'm the son of a retired New York City police officer. For my dad, Joe, protect and serve wasn't a slogan or a motto. He put himself at risk every time he stepped onto those streets, and there were days that if circumstances perhaps had gone a little differently, I wouldn't have been born. He watched as his colleagues, his friends, lost their lives while trying to save the lives of others. There are many reasons I chose to be a prosecutor, but at the forefront was my admiration for my dad's service. To step into the breach, to sacrifice for the greater good is the noblest of callings. Our law enforcement officers and our military face very real risks that those of us who work behind desks cannot imagine. These men and women deserve our understanding, they deserve our gratitude, and they deserve our respect. Now, my dad also taught me another valuable lesson. I could always be better. Be a better student, better athlete, better son, better person. There is no profession, occupation, or endeavor that cannot improve. For any member who wants to have an honest, thoughtful, fact-based conversation about how we can improve policing in Florida, my door and my mind are open. I do not dismiss, nor do I minimize the complicated issues and historical entanglements surrounding police and race in the United States. I recognize that my own experience has its limitations, and that emotions can run high. But passion isn't the measure of good policy, and when dialogue descends into diatribe, when it leads to the vilification of an entire profession, when it becomes a justification for violence and lawlessness, then we have abandoned reason for rage. And that is where we should all draw the line. We cannot blame all of law enforcement for the sins of a few. We must not take action that puts the lives of Floridians at risk, and we should not allow any government in Florida to defund the police. Recognizing the impact that my father had on who I become has made me incredibly aware of what I say and do with my own children. The birth of my sons has changed my life in ways I could have scarcely imagined. Prescott and Conrad have made me a better person, less self-involved, more patient. They've also changed my perspective about time. When I take my kids out to the sand dunes in the Gulf of Mexico and I see their excitement and joy, I know that I never want this feeling to end. That this is something I want my boys to experience with their children. I never want my kids to grow up, and yet I can't wait for them to, so I can take my grandkids on their first boat ride. Fatherhood has made me understand that I need to be every bit as invested in tomorrow as I am in today. Because as tempting as it is to just think about next month's job numbers or this year's budget shortfall, if we do that while ignoring the emerging threats and latent dangers facing our state, we will fail my children, and we will fail yours. I'm reminded of the Latin phrase, semper paratus, which means always ready. It is the motto of the United States Coast Guard, and it should be our guiding emergency management principle. In Florida, we understand all too well the devastation that is caused by hurricanes and the still fresh wounds inflicted by Michael and Irma. We also remember the memory that continues to haunt South Florida through Hurricane Andrew. Homeowners have spent 15 years dealing with all the ways the hurricanes of 2004 and 2005 have changed Florida's insurance markets. Yet somehow, we always seem to be responding or reacting to storms. We need to shift our perspective, to move beyond our state's current hazard mitigation strategy and develop a strategic plan that ensures we are all prepared for all foreseeable contingencies. Of course, not every crisis can be anticipated. On January 1st, none of us could have accurately predicted the events of 2020. COVID-19 came roaring into our lives, and nothing has been quite the same. We're still trying to understand all the ways and account for them that this virus has impacted and continues to impact families, communities, churches, and schools. I expect much of this session will be spent dealing with the fallout of the virus and modernizing our laws and our plans to ensure that we are prepared for future pandemics. But COVID-19 remains the exception, not the rule. Most of the dangers we face are not stealth viruses. In Florida, we are surrounded on three sides by water. And like it or not, and you can spend as much time arguing over the why as you would like, that water is flowing into places it shouldn't, flooding streets, damaging homes, and ruining businesses. We need to stop treating our environmental budget like a giant pork barrel buffet. We need to bring the same long-range planning and strategic discipline to our environmental programs that we bring to our transportation work plan. We need to stop fixating on land purchases as the sole measure of conservation and embrace the spectrum of priorities, from beach renourishment to septic tank conversion to flood mitigation. In Florida, the quality of our water is inextricably tied to the quality of our life. Quality of life is not a concept we spend a lot of time in government. We don't really measure it. EDR doesn't issue a report. We don't do an estimating conference, and there isn't a state agency that regulates it. But it is an idea that is at the core of every family and to every community. My mom, Marie, always tried to instill in me the notion that life is about more than just academic or professional success. It's about friendships and relationships. It's about being a part of civic organizations and being active in your church. It's about helping your neighbors, those you've met and those you know. My mother showed me that government isn't and shouldn't be at the center of people's lives. Government can remove barriers and provide guardrails, but it cannot fill those spaces created by families, neighbors, communities, and churches. We cannot legislate quality of life. We cannot appropriate prosperity or regulate happiness. But we also can't be afraid to talk openly about the crises facing our families. Recently, I've been looking at the data of the disparities that Black women face in maternal health care. Poor prenatal care can result in poor health outcomes. Poor prenatal care can result in poor health outcomes for infants, which can in turn impact their development. Every baby should have the opportunity to be born healthy. In my designation speech, I talked about the crisis facing boys, that our sons are falling behind in school and dropping out of the workforce, about how boys aged 15 to 19 are 3 times more likely to commit suicide than girls. There's no doubt a connection between the crisis in boys and the well-documented problem of fatherlessness. We cannot ignore our children in crisis, nor can we allow them to fall through the cracks in the system. I wish I could pass a law that would guarantee that every child in Florida would have what I was lucky enough to have, a mother who always put the welfare of her children first. Can't fix that problem with a law. But we can do something to fix the child welfare system, to raise the quality of caseworkers, to encourage adoption, and to create support systems for older kids in foster care. Still, kids are resilient, and they can overcome adversity and change their lives. One of my grandfathers was abandoned by his parents at an orphanage. He overcame his circumstances, went to war in the South Pacific, and became a successful businessman. My other grandfather immigrated from this country to this country from Portugal. He had no formal education, but taught himself to read and write 7 languages. He found in words and books the tools he needed to change his life. Literacy expands our vision of what is possible. It allows us to walk in the shoes of others and to learn more about ourselves. Books are doorways to new ideas and new adventures. Florida has been a national leader in reading, and Governor Jeb Bush deserves the lion's share of the credit for insisting that every child can learn to read, for implementing new strategies and demanding accountability. We've outperformed the rest of the country on closing the achievement gap, but it is not enough. If we don't take aggressive new steps and just continue with current trends, it will be 230 years before every Florida child is reading on grade level. Maybe our state government can't send a person to the moon, but we can try to make sure that every child in Florida can read and understand a book about the moon by the year 2030. That's why I'm asking all of you to join me in launching our New Worlds initiative, where the state of Florida will partner with private donors to put books in the homes of every struggling reader or low-income child from grades kindergarten through 5. Our goal would be to have a book delivered to each child's home every month to get them excited about reading and help them build a home library that will not only benefit them and their siblings, but their friends as well. If a child can read, they can learn. If they can learn, then everything is possible. Families, though, are the key. To engage and empower parents, we will partner with local libraries and schools to have book boot camps where parents can come to learn how to teach their child to read. We know from our experience with school choice that when we engage parents in their child's education, we can see dramatic improvements, especially among low-income and minority communities. Our families are our first teachers, and as policymakers, we should be racking our brains on how to give parents every possible tool, whether it's a book or an education savings account, to help their child find a better future. Literacy and education are only part of life's supply chain. A better future requires access to better training. Better training requires better jobs. Better jobs requires new ideas and new innovators. Government doesn't create jobs, but we can pursue policies that help those that are ready, willing, and able to help themselves. Education is the fuel, but work is the engine that drives our society. Work lifts people up and gives them dignity and purpose. Unfortunately, I think that our society has forgotten the value of work. Fame has eclipsed achievement as cultural currency. And we've become so focused on college as a pathway to success that we have created a system that marginalizes opportunities for many Floridians. We need an opportunity agenda in the Florida House, an agenda that zeroes in on working and middle-class families. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars over the years on a fragmented workforce system that only measures inputs. We can do better. We need to be the first state in the country to insist that workforce programs meet actual outcome standards. We need to create an opportunity hub integrating all of our workforce programs into a unified system. Florida's path to prosperity lies in encouraging new entrepreneurs and new businesses. When we talk about entrepreneurship in Florida, it can come across sometimes that we think that all new businesses have to be either a tech startup or a Fortune 500 company. But the lifeblood of Florida's economy lies in neither extreme. It rests with the small business owners like my in-laws, David and Beverly Long, who opened their gas station and mechanic shop 30 years ago. My father-in-law doesn't see himself as a captain of industry, but he gets up every day. He goes to work. He serves his customers, and he tries to do right by his employees. Self-employment leads to self-determination and self-actualization. My challenge to this House is that we develop an entrepreneurship agenda that knocks down the barriers holding back all of those untapped job creators. Here's a few suggestions to get us started. Let's create a delay discount on government fees. If a state or local agency fails to promptly issue a license or permit, the fee associated with it is reduced or waived. Let's inject energy into Florida's rural communities by promoting them as destinations for remote work and considering repurposing existing funds to build out broadband infrastructure in rural Florida. Let's continue to remove occupational licenses that have nothing to do with protecting the public and everything to do with creating barriers to competition. Let's support home-based businesses by passing laws that will make Florida the national leader in promoting cottage industries. In Florida, we should be in the business of new business. We've had a good deal of discussion in recent years regarding the role of higher education in Florida's economic life. Our taxpayer-funded colleges and universities should not be job training centers, but they also cannot divorce themselves from the economic needs of our state. And while our public universities should offer a full range of degree options, it does not follow that we should subsidize every degree to the same degree. We should consider changing the funding incentives to reward universities for enrolling students in programs that are either tied to a high-demand occupation or require an exceptional degree of intellectual rigor. In addition, we could offer a high-low scholarship, which would provide a 50% discount on tuition for students who enroll in a major course linked to a high-demand job. But if universities aren't just about jobs, neither should they be resorts with an occasional class. Virtual education can expand access to non-traditional college students and students whose family obligations make it difficult to enroll at a major research university. We should offer those students a free seat scholarship that would provide a discount on tuition if they opt for a virtual class in lieu of an in-person one. Floridians are made as much as we are born. And higher education can be an effective way to lure young, talented people to our state. But let's consider tapping into one of our greatest resources, our senior population, and create a scholarship. To our grandparents, if you have a grandchild who is a top-performing student in another state, they could qualify for in-state tuition at a Florida university. Our higher education system will, of course, be central to our budget conversations this session. It's no secret that Florida's economy has stumbled as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we may be facing a revenue shortfall in putting together this year's state budget. But where some people may see crisis, we see opportunity. We need to stop congratulating ourselves on how much we spend on a problem and start asking ourselves what we are getting for the money we spend. We thought we were spending millions of dollars to help women and children in the fight against domestic violence. It turned out we were really helping Tiffany Carr buy houses in North Carolina so she could hide away from our process servers. The scandal surrounding the Coalition Against Domestic Violence has laid bare one of the failures in Florida's system of government. In the 1970s and 80s, when the Democrats ran Florida, we created boards, commissions, councils, and regional entities. The grand democratic theory was rooted in the church of the technocrat. If we can only create independent bodies filled with experts, we'll get good governance. Well, those entities were unable to adapt, unwilling to innovate, and incapable of doing much more than perpetuating their own existence. Then, in the 1990s and 2000s, Republicans took over, and we worshiped at the altar of the private sector. We created quasi-private entities under the theory that they would bring the energy and innovation of the market into government. Instead, we got entities that acted like the private sector companies when it came to pay and perks, but like government agencies when it came to innovation and funding. Under both approaches, we have a vast, mostly uncharted, and mostly unaccountable network of public and quasi-private entities with the authority to tax and spend and regulate private behavior. If Washington, D.C. has a deep state, in Florida, we have a subterranean state. It's time we brought these entities to the surface. For the ones that can demonstrate actual positive outcomes, we need to ensure there are adequate fiscal controls and accountability measures. And for those that are doing little than adding to just administrative costs to already underperforming programs, they need to be dissolved and their functions reassigned to an accountable entity. I acknowledge that discussions about accountability make some people uncomfortable. But we can't be afraid to be honest when something isn't working. Silence strangles the truth. We can't avoid talking about things that matter because the conversation might be controversial. I said that earlier when talking about the crises in families. The same thing also applies to patriotism. The very word patriotism does seem to cause some in the media and all of woke Twitter to swarm like locusts. In their funhouse mirror universe, they see even the most innocuous expression of patriotism as something dark and sinister. They equate patriotism with white nationalism. But patriotism is a rejection of white nationalism and any doctrine that seeks to divide America. Patriotism is an expression of love for one's country. Teaching our children to appreciate and love the United States of America should be a fundamental and indispensable part of our curriculum in elementary and secondary education. When I say that patriotism is about love, I don't use that word lightly. I would never use it lightly. Everything I know about love, I learned from my wife, Shannon. She taught me that love isn't shallow. It isn't something of a fairy tale or a pop song. It is seen as seeing someone for who they really are, flaws and all, and loving them anyway. Real love recognizes that no one is perfect and that we are not simply the sum of our worst moments. We forgive those we love because we can separate the person from the mistakes that they have made. That kind of love, when applied to our country, that is patriotism. The United States is the only nation in the world animated by the power of an idea, that every individual is entitled to liberty and freedom. Throughout our history, we have struggled, sometimes painfully, but always under our own volition to live up to that ideal. Patriotism isn't just about marching in a parade or waving a flag. It is embracing your part in this grand experiment of liberty. We shouldn't be afraid to share that ideal with our children or to talk to them about the shining city on a hill. Just as we shouldn't back away in older grades from students are talking about the times in our history where we've fallen horribly short of that ideal. We must have those conversations because if we don't foster a common faith in our nation, then we will not be able to maintain a civil society. I would love for every school-age child to be able to hear from Floridians, Americans, who hail from countries in Latin America or other parts of the world where freedom is a luxury and liberty is a dream. Let them tell our school children why, of all the nations in the world, they chose the United States of America as their home. Let them say loudly and with pride in their voice, "Todos somos americanos." We are all Americans. I know not everyone will feel that way. Most of us have had the experience of being in a relationship with someone who's perpetually critical, who always assumes the worst about us, who withholds affection unless you're willing to change everything about yourself to conform to their idea of what you should be. In relationships, we recognize that behavior is dysfunctional and toxic. We don't call it love. And when applied to our country, we shouldn't pretend that it's patriotism. This denigration of the idea of patriotism is part of a larger movement that disputes the basic tenets of American life. It's a movement that believes our founding fathers should be rejected and their monuments torn down. It's a movement that believes that capitalism, an economic system that has lifted more people out of poverty than any economic system in the history of the world, should be abolished. It's a movement that believes free speech should only be permitted to the extent that that speech conforms to what they deem is acceptable. And they believe religions should be punished for maintaining basic tenets of the faith that are inconsistent with the movement's own beliefs. Fundamentally, this movement rejects the idea that rests at the heart of American society: pluralism. The notion that we can all live in this country together, that we are all part of a greater American family, even if we don't agree on every issue, even if we have different religions, beliefs, or values. What is interesting about these movements is that they are rarely expressions of popular will, but rather abuses perpetuated by the elite and powerful. In the era of McCarthyism, it was gross misuse of political power. Today, it is cultural and technological power. Instead of the Red Scare, we have the cancel culture and its roving band of Twitter Robespierres who scour social media looking for a person to ruin their livelihood because they said something stupid or insensitive or worse, something that didn't comply with the movement's narrow orthodoxy. In their inquisition, they are aided and abetted by weak university administrators and cowardly corporate executives who lack the moral courage to push back against a mob or distinguish right from wrong. Now, I want to be clear, as I said earlier, this movement has been given an outsized voice by the media and probably only constitutes a small fraction of the population. I don't believe intolerance or cancel culture represent the values of mainstream Floridians, Democrats, Republicans, or independents. I do believe that this is still a state where we value free speech, where we recognize good people of good intent, can disagree on matters of politics or faith without resorting to personal attacks. We need to look at the practice of doxing, publishing an individual's private information online for the purposes of subjecting them to harassment or the risk of physical harm. And we need to figure out how to adopt our criminal laws to shut down that kind of behavior. If we cannot control the Twitter mob, then we can at least ensure that no Floridian is placed at risk by an actual mob. We need to remind our public institutions of higher learning that exposing students to new ideas is not an inconvenience. It's part of their core mission. We need universities where students are participating in challenging debates, not hiding away in safe spaces. And if any public university denies tenure because a professor fails to pass an ideological litmus test, then the university should be subjected to liability on damages only payable from their private funds. All of us want the same things for our families: to live the life we want to live, to find a good job, to send our kids to a good school, to live on a safe street, to drink clean water, and to be free to believe or worship however we choose. That is the quintessential American dream. And because we want those things for ourselves, we should want them for our neighbors, our communities, and our state. That is the job of the state legislature, to knock down every barrier and create every opportunity so that every family in Florida can find their own American dream. I know that I've thrown a lot at you today. Please know it hasn't been offered as a formal agenda, but as an invitation. If you heard an issue, a problem, or a topic today that excites you, that you want to be part of solving, come see me. If you happen to have an idea that's better than the one that I had, I can't wait to hear about it. And if you absolutely hated something I said, that's great too. I look forward to having that conversation with you. We have a lot of work to do, members, and it's time to get started. May God bless you, may God bless your families, and may God bless the great state of Florida.